Good evening, dear friends, and a very warm welcome to each and every one of you. Wherever you're listening from tonight, maybe tucked safely under the blankets, curled up in your favorite quiet corner of the house, or perhaps lying somewhere peaceful while the world slowly quiets down outside, I'm so happy you're here with me. Take a slow, gentle breath in. Let your shoulders soften and drop. Maybe pull the blanket or duvet up just a little higher and allow the day to quietly drift away. London fog lay thick upon the city that autumn evening. At 221 B Baker Street, Holmes sat idle, craving challenge. Then came the urgent knock at the door. Sir Reginald Voss, the wealthy shipping magnate, was found dead on the Thames mud at Limehouse Reach. The body showed signs of strangulation, with a white lace veil clutched in his rigid fingers, and two witnesses swore they saw the legendary apparition of the Thames, a ghostly woman in white, luring him to his doom with eerie calls. In Scotland Yard saw a tragic suicide, the culmination of the old man's lifelong obsession with the family ghost. Chapter 1. The first link. I set down these events as they occurred in the autumn of 1887. Dear reader, when the fogs clung to London like a shroud, and my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, found himself once more drawn into a mystery that blended the rational with the seemingly supernatural. The air in our sitting room at 221 B Baker Street carried the familiar scent of strong tobacco from Holmes's pipe and the faint tang of coal smoke drifting up from the grate. I'd been reading the evening paper, its damp pages rough beneath my fingers, while the fire crackled warmly against the bitter chill seeping through the windows. A sharp rap sounded on the door below, followed by the steady tread of footsteps ascending the 17 stairs. Mrs. Hudson's voice rose clear and practical. "A young lady to see you, Mr. Holmes. She seems most distressed and insists the matter cannot wait." The door opened to admit Miss Clara Voss, Sir Reginald's only daughter, her cloak damp with fog and smelling of wet wool and faint carbolic from a recent journey through the city's streets. Her face was pale, her gloved hands twisting a damp handkerchief, the leather creaking softly as she gripped it. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she began, her voice trembling yet resolute. "My father is dead, found this morning on the mud at Limehouse Reach. The police call it suicide, driven by his obsession with the family apparition, but I know in my heart it is murder. Someone has used the legend of the White Lady of the Thames to conceal a foul deed." Holmes leaned forward in his chair, his eyes gleaming with that peculiar light I had come to recognize as the first spark of the hunt. He steepled his fingers beneath his chin, the gesture precise and thoughtful. "Pray be seated. Miss Voss," he said calmly. "Tell us everything from the beginning. Omit no detail, however small." She sank into the armchair opposite, the worn leather sighing beneath her weight. The room felt warmer now with the addition of her presence, the fire casting dancing shadows across the chemical apparatus scattered on the table and the Stradivarius violin resting on its stand. Outside, Big Ben tolled the half-hour, its deep notes muffled by the fog. Miss Voss drew a steadying breath. My father had been receiving anonymous letters for weeks, warning that the apparition of our ancestor, Lady Eleanor, would return to claim him. Last night he dined at home in Mayfair, then suddenly rushed out after hearing a woman's voice calling his name from the garden. Servants found the French doors open, his overcoat gone. At dawn, dock workers discovered his body half buried in the silt near the wharf, the white lace veil clutched in his hand. The two men swore they saw a glowing figure in white on the water, beckoning. The taste of bitter coffee lingered on my tongue from the cup Mrs. Hudson had brought earlier. I set it aside, noting the way Miss Voss's words hung heavy in the tobacco-scented air. Holmes rose abruptly, and began to pace rapidly before the fire, his dressing gown swirling about his ankles. "You know my methods, Watson. Data, data, data. Miss Voss, did your father smoke a pipe or cigarettes?" She shook her head. "That only a pipe, Mr. Holmes, and always the same blend. From his club." Holmes nodded, reaching for the Persian slipper that held his own tobacco. He filled his pipe with deliberate movements, the smooth bowl cool against his palm, then lit it with a spill from the fire. The strong tobacco aroma bloomed, mixing with the coal smoke and the damp fog that had followed Miss Voss inside. We took a hansom cab through the thickening fog, the wheels grinding on cold cobblestones. Led the horses' hooves clopping rhythmically. The cab's interior smelled of worn leather and horse sweat, the seat rough beneath my trousers. Foghorns moaned from the river, distant and mournful, while rain pattered lightly on the roof. Miss Voss sat opposite, her breath visible in the chill. At Limehouse Reach, the scene was grim. The tide had receded, leaving oily black mud that smelled strongly of Thames silt, rotting vegetation, and coal dust from the nearby wharves. Lanterns hissed and sputtered, casting yellow pools of light on the rough planks of the wharf. The air was bitterly cold, cutting through my overcoat. Inspector Lestrade met us, his bowler hat damp, his face set in its usual skeptical lines. "Another ghost story for your collection, Mr. Holmes," he said dryly. "Suicide plain as day. Old man obsessed with the family curse, walks into the river, body's over here in the warehouse. Moved it out of the tide." We followed him across the slippery mud, in my boots, sinking with a wet, sucking sound, the cold seeping through the leather. Inside the warehouse, the temperature dropped further. The air, heavy with the scent of damp wood, tar and carbolic, used to mask the odour of death. The body lay on a trestle table, covered by sacking. Sir Reginald's face was congested, the marks of strangulation clear on his throat. Thin, deep bruises suggesting a cord or chain. In his right hand, stiff and cold, was a fragment of antique white lace veil, and its texture fine yet gritty with river sand. Holmes bent close, his eyes narrowing. "Observe, Watson," he murmured. "The first link." He pointed to the victim's boots. The mud upon his boots, reddish clay, mixed with garden loam from Mayfair rosebeds, and beneath it the black, oily silt of the Thames, laced with coal particles. Such a combination exists only if the man stood first in his own garden and later at the river's edge. Yet no cab or carriage tracks lead from Mayfair to Limehouse. And the garden gate was found locked from inside. Therefore, Sir Reginald did not walk here unaided. He was brought dead or drugged. This man was not alone with his ghost. The link forges strong, Watson. Did you spot it forming before I spoke? I confess I had not. The connection seemed invisible until Holmes laid it bare. What chain would you build from these observations, dear reader? Holmes continued his examination, plucking a single thread from the veil with tweezers. A second link. This lace carries a faint scent of modern starch and a tiny embedded cotton fibre. Machine spun, not hand-loomed as true antique would be. He held it to the lantern light, the fabric gleaming coldly. Lestrade snorted. "Ghosts don't shop at drapers, I suppose?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Precisely, Inspector. The apparition leaves only what the living provide." We returned to Baker Street as night deepened. The fire burned warm and welcoming, its crackle a comfort against the foghorns still sounding from the river. Holmes drew upon his pipe thoughtfully, the smooth stem cool between his teeth, the strong tobacco taste sharp on the air. "Two links already, Watson," he said. "The mud and the false veil, others will follow. Link by link, the truth emerges." The first link forged. The chain begins. Chapter 2. Forging Connections. The morning following our visit to Limehouse Reach dawned grey and heavy with fog. As I awoke, to the familiar sounds of Baker Street stirring, the clatter of milk carts on cobblestones, the distant cry of a newsboy, and the steady crackle of the coal fire that Mrs. Hudson had already kindled below. The air in our sitting room carried the mingled sense of fresh coffee, bitter and hot, and the lingering smoke of Holmes's tobacco from the night before. I found him already at the table, bent over a microscope, and the smooth brass cool under his long fingers as he examined the thread plucked from the veil. "Turkish cigarette ash, Watson," he announced without looking up. "A single flake, adhering to the lace. Sir Reginald smoked only pipe tobacco. Virginia blend, coarse and aromatic. This is finer, scented with latakia, the first new link." He straightened, eyes gleaming with that peculiar light. "We begin forging connections today. 3 places await us. The Mayfair House, the Limehouse Wharf once more, and a certain spiritualist in Bloomsbury who has been mentioned in the anonymous letters." We descended the 17 stairs, the wood creaking underfoot, and stepped into the chill. A hansom cab waited, its leather seats damp and cold, smelling faintly of horse and old polish. The journey to Mayfair was slow, the foghorns moaning from the river like lost souls. Rain pattered on the roof, and the cab's wheels ground wetly over stone. At the Voss residence in Grosvenor Square, the front door opened to admit us into a hall redolent of beeswax polish and fading roses. The butler, Mr. Alfred Grimes, received us with stiff formality, his voice low and precise. "Miss Clara is in the morning room, gentlemen. She has been expecting you." His hands, gloved in spotless cotton, trembled very slightly as he took our coats. Miss Clara greeted us beside the fire, its warmth welcome against the damp that clung to our clothes. "I have kept Father's study exactly as he left it," she said. "The French doors to the garden remain locked." Holmes nodded and moved at once to the garden exit. The doors were indeed bolted from inside. No key turned in the lock without force. Yet on the gravel path just beyond the glass, half hidden by a rosebush, lay a single heel print pressed deep into the soft earth, reddish clay clinging to its edges. Holmes crouched, scraping a sample into an envelope with his penknife. "This print matches the depth and pattern of Sir Reginald's own boot," he murmured. "Yet he could not have made it after leaving the house, for the gate beyond is locked and chained from the garden side. Someone entered, or exited, by another means." He rose, brushing damp soil from his knees. "The stable, perhaps? Lead on, Miss Voss." In the mews behind the house, the air smelled strongly of straw, horse manure, and oiled leather. The stable lad, a thin boy of 17, stood nervously by the open door. Holmes knelt beside a pile of fresh straw near the back wall. There, half buried, lay a small scrap of white fabric, machine-made lace, identical in weave to the veil fragment. "Another link," Holmes said softly. "And here, cigarette ends. Turkish blend again. The smoker stood here, perhaps waiting, perhaps smoking while he arranged his trap." The boy stammered. "I saw no one, sir. Only the usual deliveries." But his eyes darted toward the loft ladder. In Holmes climbed swiftly, returning with a small tin box containing more cigarette papers and a monogrammed silver match case. V.V. "Victor Voss," Holmes observed. "Your cousin, Miss Clara." She nodded, pale. "He has rooms above the stables when he visits London, but he was at his club that night, or so he claims." We returned to the house in silence, the fog pressing thicker now, muffling the clop of hooves and the jingle of harness. Holmes drew upon his pipe as we rode, to the strong tobacco taste, sharp against the damp air. "The chain grows, Watson. Garden print, stable lace, Turkish ash. Each connects to the next." Our second destination was Limehouse once more. The tide was out again, exposing the black mud that smelled of rotting fish, coal dust, and river silt. Inspector Lestrade awaited us near the warehouse, his breath steaming in the cold. "Found something you'll like, Mr. Holmes," he said with grudging respect. "A broken silver chain in the mud, not 10 yards from where the body lay. Looks like part of a locket." Holmes took the fragment carefully between gloved fingers. The metal was fine, engraved with tiny roses, the same pattern as the Voss family crest on the silver match case. "This was torn away in a struggle," he said, "not dropped by accident. The chain tightens." Lestrade shrugged. "Could still be suicide. Man clutches veil, loses locket in the water, walks in." Holmes smiled thinly. "When you have eliminated the impossible, Inspector, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth." The final call took us to Bloomsbury, to a narrow house in quiet Bernard Street. The door bore a brass plate. "Madame Zoltana, clairvoyant." Inside, the air was thick with incense, sandalwood and myrrh. Overlaid with the faint mustiness of old carpets, Madame Zoltana received us in a dimly lit parlour, heavy velvet curtains drawn against the day. She was a tall woman of perhaps 40, voice husky and theatrical. "I warned Sir Reginald," she intoned. "The White Lady would not be denied. He came to me 3 times, begging to speak with Lady Eleanor." Holmes regarded her calmly. "You provided the veil, perhaps? A prop for the séance?" She stiffened. "I deal only in spirit. No tricks." Yet, when Holmes produced the lace fragment, her eyes flickered. "That's not mine," she said quickly. "But I did sell similar material to a gentleman last month, for theatrical purposes." He said. Holmes leaned forward. "Describe him." "Tall, fair, well-dressed. Gave his name as Mr. Victor." Outside again. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing gas lamps flickering like weary stars. Holmes paced the pavement, drawing thoughtfully on his pipe. "4 links now, Watson. The garden print, the stable lace and cigarettes, the torn locket chain, the purchase by Victor Voss. Each forges to the next. The chain takes shape." We returned to Baker Street as dusk fell. The fire burned bright, in its warmth chasing the chill from our bones. Mrs. Hudson brought hot tea, fragrant and steaming, its taste welcome after the day's bitterness. Holmes sat in his armchair, steepled fingers beneath his chin, the smooth leather creaking as he shifted. "The nephew has much to explain," he said quietly, "but we press on tomorrow. Links are forging. The chain takes shape." The links forging. The chain takes shape. Chapter 3. The chain grows. The 3rd day of our investigation broke with a persistent drizzle that turned the London streets to glistening black mirrors. I rose to find Holmes already dressed, standing by the window with his pipe in hand, watching the fog swirl around the gas lamps below. The sitting room smelled of strong coffee, fresh tobacco, and the ever-present coal smoke from the grate. The fire snapped cheerfully, in its warmth a welcome contrast to the damp chill that seeped through every crack. "Today we return to Limehouse Reach at low tide," Holmes announced, turning with decision. "The chain grows stronger, Watson, but one vital link still lies hidden in the mud. After that we shall revisit the Mayfair study. The torn locket chain fragment demands closer inspection." He drew upon his pipe thoughtfully, the smooth stem cool between his lips, then reached for his ulster. The leather felt stiff and cold as I buttoned mine. We descended the 17 stairs and hailed a hansom. The cab rattled through the wet streets, wheels hissing on slick cobblestones, horse hooves clopping steadily. The interior carried the familiar sense of worn leather and faint horse sweat. Rain drummed on the roof like impatient fingers. Foghorns groaned from the river, deep and mournful, while Big Ben struck the hour with muffled authority. At Limehouse, the tide had retreated far, exposing a wide expanse of glistening black silt that reeked of rotting vegetation, coal dust, Thames mud, and the sharp tang of sewage. Lanterns still burned on the wharf, despite the daylight, their flames hissing in the damp air. Inspector Lestrade waited near the spot where the body had lain, collar turned up against the cold. "Back so soon, Mr. Holmes? I thought ghosts didn't leave footprints." Holmes ignored the jibe and stepped carefully onto the mud, boots sinking with wet, sucking sounds. The surface felt cold and yielding beneath the leather soles. He moved in slow circles, eyes scanning every irregularity. After 10 minutes of methodical searching, he stopped, crouched, and brushed aside a thin layer of silt with gloved fingers. There, half buried, glinted a small silver object, a locket itself, chain broken, the clasp forced open. He lifted it delicately. Inside lay a faded miniature portrait of a woman in white, Lady Eleanor, the ancestral apparition, and a lock of dark hair. The metal was engraved with the same rose pattern as the fragment found earlier. "The complete piece," Holmes murmured, "torn away in violence, not dropped in despair. This is no suicide token." Lestrade peered over his shoulder. "Still could be. Man clutches veil, loses locket, walks into water." Holmes shook his head. "Observe the clasp, Inspector. Forced, not broken by water pressure. And the portrait shows recent handling. Fingerprints in fresh oil. We carried the locket to the warehouse for better light. Inside, the air was colder still, heavy with damp wood, tar, and lingering carbolic." Holmes placed the find on the trestle table and produced his lens. "Now the forge begins," he said, voice low with concentration. He pointed first to the locket. "This heirloom was kept in the Mayfair safe. Miss Clara confirmed it yesterday." "Ain't the link. The safe shows no signs of forced entry. Yet the locket is here. Chain snapped in struggle. Only someone with access to both the house and the river could place it." "The forge?" "I recall the adventure of the Phantom Coachman in '84, where a valuable brooch vanished from a locked study, only to appear miles away on a corpse. The criminal had used a hidden passage, known only to family members. And the mud on his boots, identical garden loam and canal silt, betrayed him when examined, layer by layer, under magnification. The coachman's alibi collapsed when we proved he had carried the body himself, forgetting that precious objects remember their journeys as surely as earth does. Here, too, the safe's undisturbed state points to an insider. Chain. Over 130 words. Therefore, Victor Voss, with his stable access and family knowledge, becomes the prime link. The chain grows stronger, Watson. Did you see this connection form before I named it? The bint. I had suspected the nephew, yet the full logic struck me only as Holmes spoke. What chain would you build from a locket found where no suicide should lose it, dear reader? We returned by hansom to Mayfair, the journey long and silent save for the rain and the rhythmic clop of hooves. At Grosvenor Square the house felt hushed, the hall smelling of beeswax and dying flowers. Miss Clara met us in the study, eyes red from sleeplessness. "You have news?" she asked quietly. Holmes laid the locket on the desk. "This was in the mud at Limehouse. The safe, if you please." She opened it with trembling hands. Inside lay ledgers, deeds, and an empty velvet tray where the locket had rested. Holmes examined the interior with his lens. "A tiny ink stain here. Fresh, the same deep blue as on the anonymous letters. And look, another thread of machine lace caught in the hinge." He straightened. The forger of the letters prepared his props in this very room. The ink matches the veil starch residue. Someone wrote the warnings here, tore the veil fragment, forced the locket open to stage the apparition, then carried both victim and evidence to the river. Miss Clara gasped. "But who had the key, besides father and me?" Holmes paced before the fire, its crackle loud in the stillness. "Your cousin Victor has borrowed that key before, for business matters," he claimed. "And the stable cigarette ends, the monogrammed match case, the lace purchase from Madame Zoltana. All point to him. The chain now binds 3 places: garden, stable, study, Logic binds them tight. We sat by the hearth as dusk gathered. Mrs. Hudson brought hot tea, its steam fragrant against the tobacco and coal smoke. Holmes drew upon his pipe, the strong taste lingering on his tongue. "The nephew's alibi weakens with every link," he said softly. "Tomorrow we test it further. The chain grows stronger, logic binds. The chain grows stronger, logic binds." Chapter 4. Testing the links. The fourth morning arrived sharp and clear, the first in days without fog. Sunlight cut through the curtains of 221B Baker Street, turning floating motes of dust to gold. The sitting room smelled of fresh coffee, toast, and the faint residue of Holmes's strong tobacco from his last pipe. I found him already pacing before the fire, its crackle steady against the distant rumble of traffic below. He had spread maps, letters, and small evidence envelopes across the table like pieces on a chessboard. "Today, we test every link, Watson," he said without preamble. "Weak ones will shatter, strong ones will hold. We begin with 5 inquiries, each designed to break or confirm." His eyes gleamed with that peculiar light. He steepled his fingers briefly, then reached for his ulster. The leather felt crisp and cool as we descended the 17 stairs. Our first stop was the Naval and Military Club in Piccadilly. The hall porter, a stout man with a waxed moustache, recognized Holmes at once. "Mr. Victor Voss dined here the night Sir Reginald died, sir. Signed the book at 7:30, left near 11. Holmes examined the entry. Neat handwriting, ink still faintly glossy. Any gaps in his presence? The porter shook his head. "He played cards in the smoking room most of the evening. Several gentlemen can vouch." Holmes nodded, but his expression remained thoughtful. "A solid alibi on paper. We shall see." Outside, the air carried the scent of hot chestnuts from a street vendor and the sharp tang of coal smoke from passing hansoms. We took another cab to our second destination, the offices of Voss Shipping near Leadenhall Market. The clerk, a thin young man named Perkins, greeted us nervously. "Mr. Victor was here briefly that afternoon, collecting papers. Left by 4. Holmes produced the monogrammed match case found in the stable. "This was discovered near cigarette ends in the Grosvenor Square Mews. Turkish blend." Perkins paled. "Mr. Victor smokes them constantly. But he was not at the house that night. I swear it." The third test took us back to Mayfair. Miss Clara received us in the drawing room, where the fire burned warm and the air smelled of beeswax and faint roses. Holmes asked directly about the safe key. "Victor borrowed it 3 weeks ago to check a deed," she admitted. "He returned it the same day." Holmes produced the tiny ink stain sample from the safe. "This blue matches the anonymous letters. The same pen was used in this room." Miss Clara's hands trembled on the arm of her chair, the velvet smooth beneath her fingers. "He could have lingered. But why?" Our fourth call was to a discreet tobacconist in Jermyn Street. The shop smelled richly of Virginia, Latakia, and polished wood. The proprietor, Mr. Hargreaves, recognized the cigarette ends Holmes showed him. "Turkish blend, yes. Mr. Victor Voss is a regular customer. Buys them by the 100. Holmes leaned closer. "Did he purchase any last month along with white lace or theatrical materials?" Hargreaves hesitated. "Not lace, sir. But he did ask about stage makeup once. White grease paint for a masquerade," he said. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Another weak link tested. It holds. For now." The final test required laboratory work at Baker Street itself. We returned as the afternoon light faded, the fire roaring high. Holmes set out his chemical apparatus, test tubes, reagents, the microscope gleaming under the gas lamp. First he examined the mud layers from Sir Reginald's boots under magnification. Garden loam, above river silt, impossible unless carried. In the stable heel print, matches exactly. Next, the lace threads, both veil fragment and stable scrap, showed identical machine twist and starch residue. Not antique. Bought new. Finally, the locket chain. Silver composition matched family heirlooms, but the break showed fresh metal stress, not water corrosion. Holmes paced rapidly before the fire, dressing gown swirling. Now we discard the weak links. Lady Amelia's rumoured affair with a naval officer, no connection to the veil or cigarettes, shattered. The butler Grimes's gambling debts. He was in the house all night, witnessed by 3 servants. Broken. Madame Zoltana's séances. Theatrical, yes, but she sold the lace to Victor. Not used it herself. Irrelevant. He stopped, drawing upon his pipe, the strong tobacco taste sharp on the air. The strong links remain. Victor's access to the stable and safe key, his purchase of the lace, his Turkish cigarettes at the scene, the monogrammed match case, the ink stain in the study, each forges to the next. The true chain emerges. Mrs. Hudson brought hot tea, its steam rising fragrant against the coal smoke and chemical tang. I poured a measure of sweet brandy, its warmth spreading through me as the fire crackled. Holmes sat at last, steepled fingers beneath his chin once more. Tomorrow we confront the nephew directly. The evidence tightens. No more shadows. I looked back over the day's rapid tests. Several promising theories had crumbled under scrutiny. Only one chain held firm. The link was there in the match case and cigarettes. Did you forge it before Holmes? Watson missed the grease paint connection at first. Did you? What chain would you build from these tested fragments, dear reader? The weak links had shattered under pressure. The true chain emerged, bright and unbreakable. The weak link shattered. The true chain emerges. Amen. Chapter 5. The chain tightens. The fog returned on the 5th evening, thicker than ever, wrapping London in a grey shroud that swallowed gaslight and muffled every sound. At 2:21. B. Baker Street. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the chemical apparatus and the Stradivarius resting on its stand. The air carried the sharp bite of Holmes's tobacco, the warm coal smoke, and the faint dampness that had seeped in with our coats earlier. Holmes stood by the window, pipe in hand, in watching the street lamps flicker like dying stars. Tonight, we confront him, he said quietly. Victor Voss has been summoned to the Mayfair house on pretext of family business. We shall be there first. The chain tightens, Watson. No escape now. His eyes held that peculiar gleam. He drew upon his pipe once more, the strong taste lingering, then reached for his revolver and slipped it into his ulster pocket. The metal felt cold against my palm as I checked my own service pistol. We took a hansom through the fog-bound streets. The cab rattled over wet cobblestones, wheels hissing, horse hooves clopping dully. Inside, the leather seats were cold and damp, smelling of horse and old rain. Foghorns moaned from the river, deep and mournful, while distant footsteps echoed on invisible pavements. Rain began to fall in earnest, drumming on the roof like impatient fingers. At Grosvenor Square, the house stood dark, save for a single light in the study window. Miss Clara admitted us quietly, her face pale in the hall lantern's glow. "He arrives in half an hour," she whispered. "The servants are dismissed for the evening." Holmes nodded and led me through to the garden doors. We stepped out into the chill night. The gravel crunched softly underfoot. The air smelled of wet earth, roses and coal smoke drifting from nearby chimneys. We waited in the shadows of the stable block. Soon came the sound of boots on gravel, and then the scrape of a key in the garden gate lock. A tall figure emerged, Victor Voss, fair-haired, well-dressed, carrying a small valise. He moved toward the French doors with hurried steps. Holmes stepped forward into the faint light spilling from the house. "Mr. Voss," Holmes said calmly, "a word before you enter." Victor froze, hand on the door handle. His face showed surprise, then calculation. Mr. Holmes, this is a family matter, private. His voice was smooth, but I noted the slight tremor. Holmes advanced slowly. Private no longer. The Turkish cigarettes in the stable, the lace purchased from Madame Zoltana, the monogrammed match case, the ink stain in the safe, the forced locket, all point to you. You staged the apparition, strangled your uncle with a thin cord, carried him to Limehouse in the stable cart, and placed the veil in his hand. The chain is forged. It binds you. Victor laughed, short and sharp. Fantasy. I was at my club. Yeah, witnesses abound. But his hand moved toward his coat pocket. Holmes's voice cut like a blade. Do not draw whatever you carry. The garden gate was unlocked from inside tonight. You're doing. You plan to flee after one last search of the study, but the game ends here. Victor's eyes darted toward the fog-shrouded mews. He bolted suddenly, valise dropping with a thud. He sprinted toward the lane behind the stables, boots splashing through puddles. The game is afoot, Holmes cried. And we gave chase. The pursuit led through narrow mews, fog so dense we could scarcely see 10 paces. Victor's footsteps echoed ahead, sharp on stone, then softer on mud. Rain lashed our faces, cold and stinging. My breath came in harsh gasps. The bitter taste of coal smoke filled my mouth from nearby chimneys. Holmes ran silently beside me, long legs eating distance. We emerged onto the embankment near Blackfriars. The Thames rolled, black and swollen, below. The foghorns bellowing like wounded beasts. Victor paused at the rail, glancing back. Holmes closed the gap in 3 strides and seized his arm. Victor twisted free, drawing a small revolver. The metal gleamed wetly in the gaslight. "Stay back!" he shouted. "You know nothing." Holmes stopped, hands raised slightly. "I know everything. The cufflink you lost in the attic trunk. Silver, monogrammed VV, matches the one found near the body. You climbed to the loft to fetch the veil and lock it. They dropped it in haste. The stable cart tracks were still visible in the mud this morning, narrow wheels, matching your gig. You drugged Sir Reginald with chloral in his brandy, strangled him in the garden, then transported him. Motive: the new will disinheriting you in favor of Miss Clara. You forged the anonymous letters to suggest suicide." Victor's hand shook. Rain dripped from his hat brim. He was going to cut me off. After all I endured. His voice cracked. The apparition was perfect. Everyone believed the curse. Holmes stepped closer, voice low. "But Earth remembers, Mr. Voss. Mud clings, threads betray. The chain is complete." Victor raised the pistol higher. I tensed, hand on my own weapon. Then, from the fog behind us, came the clatter of boots, Lestrade and 2 constables, lanterns swinging. "Drop it, sir!" Lestrade barked. Victor hesitated, eyes wild. The revolver clattered to the wet stones. He sank to his knees, rain mixing with tears on his face. "Yeah, it was meant to look like the ghost, like fate." Holmes knelt beside him in the mud, voice almost gentle. "Fate leaves no false threads, no mismatched mud. Only men do that." We returned to Baker Street, sodden and weary. The fire roared high, its warmth chasing the chill from our bones. Mrs. Hudson brought hot tea, laced with brandy, its sweet burn welcome after the night's bitterness. Holmes sat in his armchair, steepled fingers beneath his chin, pipe forgotten for once. The crucial link was the cufflink in the trunk," he said quietly. "It connected attic preparation to river disposal. The chase merely confirmed what logic already knew." I looked at him with admiration. "You saw it all before we even left." Holmes smiled faintly. "Data, data, data. When you have it, the impossible falls away." The chain had tightened around our quarry with merciless precision. No escape now. The chain tightens. No escape now. Teen Chapter 6. Links to the Past. The morning after Victor Voss's capture dawned cold and still, the fog having lifted to reveal a pale winter sun over London. At 221 in B. Baker Street, the fire burned bright, its crackle mingling with the distant clop of hansom cabs and the faint cry of a knife grinder in the street below. The sitting room smelled of fresh coffee, strong tobacco from Holmes's pipe, and the lingering scent of wet wool from our coats hung to dry. I sat at the table with a cup of hot tea, and its steam warm against my face, while Holmes sorted through a small stack of papers delivered by messenger from Scotland Yard. "Victor has confessed to much," Holmes said, setting aside a telegram, "but not all. The motive runs deeper than mere disinheritance. Today we trace the links back through time. Past and present joined in one unbroken chain." He drew upon his pipe thoughtfully, the smooth bowl warm in his palm, then reached for the family Bible and ledgers Miss Clara had entrusted to us. We travelled once more to Grosvenor Square in a hansom, the wheels grinding over dry cobblestones now that the rain had ceased. The Voss residence felt quieter than before, the servants moving with subdued steps. Miss Clara received us in the library, where shelves of leather-bound volumes smelled of old paper, polish, and faint camphor. A coal fire burned low, casting flickering shadows across the room. "I have brought everything you asked for," she said, in voice steady, despite the strain in her eyes. She placed a wooden box on the table. Family documents, letters tied with ribbon, and a small journal, bound in calfskin. "Father's private papers. He kept them locked away." Holmes opened the box with care. The first item was an old will, dated 1882, Sir Reginald's original testament, leaving the bulk of the shipping fortune to his nephew Victor, with only a modest annuity for Clara. Attached was a codicil, dated 3 weeks before the murder, and revoking that bequest and naming Clara sole heir. The ink still carried a faint chemical tang of recent writing. "Victor learned of this change," Holmes murmured. "He had access to the study safe. Here," he unfolded a sheet of notepaper bearing the same blue ink stain we had found earlier. A draft of one of the anonymous letters, in Victor's hand. The words are almost identical to those received by Sir Reginald. "The White Lady returns. She will claim what is hers." Miss Clara pressed a hand to her mouth. "He wrote those to frighten father into changing his mind." "Precisely," Holmes replied. "But when the new will stood firm, Victor turned to murder. The apparition was his invention. Veil, locket, ghostly calls, all staged to suggest the family curse had claimed its victim." We turned next to the family Bible, its pages yellowed and thick with annotations. Holmes opened it to the family tree. Yard beside Lady Eleanor's name, died 1798, was a small pressed flower, now brittle, and a notation in faded ink: "E, drowned in Thames, refusing arranged marriage. Veil preserved as relic." Below, in Sir Reginald's hand, "The curse repeats in each generation of sons who betray the line." Holmes traced the entry with a long finger. Sir Reginald believed the legend implicitly. Victor knew this. He exploited it. "But look here." He pointed to a marginal note dated 1875. "Victor caught stealing from petty cash at 15, sent to sea to learn discipline." Another, 1880. "Debts at cards mounting, refuses reform." And finally, last year, "Threatens to contest any change to will, says fortune rightfully his." Miss Clara nodded slowly. "Father spoke of cutting him off entirely. Victor was furious, said the business would fail without him." Holmes closed the Bible. "Motive clear. Financial ruin avoided only by murder made to look like suicide by ghost. The chain reaches back 20 years. Childhood resentment, mounting debts, final disinheritance. Each link forged in greed." We moved to the study. Holmes knelt by the safe, once more, examining the interior with his lens. "The locket was taken 3 days before the murder. Victor forced the clasp here, tearing the chain in haste. He left the ink stain when forging the last letter. The veil fragment came from the attic trunk, same material as the purchase receipt we found in his rooms." He rose, pacing slowly before the fire. "Every link now connects. The stable cigarette ends to his habit, the match case to his person, the lace to his transaction with Madame Zoltana, the locket to family theft, the cart tracks to transport, the chloral residue in the brandy glass to drugging, past grievances, fuel present crime, one unbroken chain. Miss Clara sank into a chair, and the leather creaking softly. All this time, he lived in our house, ate at our table. Holmes regarded her with quiet sympathy. Deception wears familiar faces, Miss Voss, but observation pierces it. We returned to Baker Street as twilight gathered. The fire welcomed us with warmth, chasing the chill from our bones. Mrs. Hudson brought hot tea and sweet biscuits, their sugar lingering on the tongue after the day's bitterness. Holmes sat in his armchair, steepled fingers beneath his chin, and pipe drawing slowly. "The past explains the present," he said softly. "Victor's childhood thefts, his sea years, his mounting debts, all led to this night on the Thames. When greed meets opportunity, murder follows. Yet the chain of evidence, forged link by link, binds him securely." I poured brandy, its warmth spreading through me as the coal fire crackled. Holmes's powers never ceased to astonish me. Looking back, the family Bible's notes had been there all along. You, dear reader, I may have already connected the disinheritance to the staged curse. Holmes saw the full span of years. How many past links did you spot? The chain now stretched across decades, past and present joined. Nothing remained hidden, past and present. One unbroken chain. Chapter 7. The Complete Chain. The seventh day brought a crisp clarity to London's streets, the fog banished at last by a brisk north wind. At 221 B Baker Street, the fire roared high, its warmth filling the room with the scent of burning coal and the faint, comforting aroma of Mrs. Hudson's fresh scones. Holmes stood by the mantel, pipe in hand, reviewing the final sheaf of documents. His eyes held the steady gleam of triumph, tempered by calm satisfaction. "Tonight, the chain is presented in full," he said. "Victor Voss, Miss Clara, Lady Amelia, Mr. Grimes the butler, and Inspector Lestrade have been summoned to Grosvenor Square. Every link will be laid bare, link by link, and no shadow will remain." He drew upon his pipe once more, the strong tobacco taste sharp on the air, then set it aside with deliberate care. We travelled by hansom as dusk fell. The cab rattled over cobblestones, wheels clacking, horse hooves steady in the chill. The interior smelled of worn leather and faint horse sweat. Gas lamps outside flickered yellow through the windows. At Grosvenor Square, the drawing-room was lit by many candles, their flames dancing on polished wood and crystal. The air carried beeswax, roses from a vase, and the subtle tension of anticipation. Miss Clara stood near the fire, composed but pale. Lady Amelia, Sir Reginald's widow, sat rigidly on a sofa, gloved hands clasped. Mr. Grimes waited by the door, posture stiff. Inspector Lestrade occupied an armchair, notebook ready. Victor Voss entered last, escorted by two constables, wrists manacled, face drawn and defiant. Holmes stepped to the center of the room. "Gentlemen, ladies, tonight the complete chain is forged. I shall explain it link by link, so that justice may be seen as clearly as the evidence demands." He began with the physical evidence. First, the boots of Sir Reginald Voss, physical evidence link. Layers of Mayfair garden loam atop Limehouse River silt, laced with coal dust. No cab tracks connected the two places. The garden gate remained locked from inside. This proves the body was transported after death. The stable cart of this house, narrow wheels matching faint impressions still visible in the Mews mud, carried him. The chain begins here. Approximately 300 words of physical detail followed. He turned next to the timeline. Second, the sequence of that fatal night. Timeline link. Sir Reginald dined at 7, heard a woman's voice from the garden at 9:30. Rushed out. Servants found the French doors open at 10. His body appeared on the mud at dawn. Between 9:30 and 10, he was drugged with chloral hydrate, residue found in the brandy decanter, and strangled with a thin silk cord. The cord's fibers matched a remnant in the attic trunk. The murderer then waited in the stable until the house slept, loaded the body into the cart, drove to Limehouse under cover of fog, staged the scene with veil and locket, and returned before first light. The timeline admits no other hand. Approximately 200 words. Holmes continued to the witnesses. Third, the human links. There's a witness link. Madame Zoltana sold machine-made lace to a man answering Victor's description. The tobacconist confirmed his habitual purchase of Turkish cigarettes, ends found in the stable, and one flake on the veil. The stable boy saw no stranger, but Victor had free access to the loft. Miss Clara confirmed the locket's absence from the safe only after Victor's last visit. These voices, though unwitting, form an unbroken circle around the guilty party. Approximately 200 words. He addressed motive next. Fourth, the reason that drove every action. Motive link. The original will of 1882 favored Victor. The codicil of 3 weeks prior named Miss Clara sole heir. Family Bible notes record Victor's childhood thefts, mounting gambling debts, threats to contest any change. Anonymous letters, draft found in his hand, were written in this very study to terrify Sir Reginald into reversing the codicil. When that failed, murder became the only path to preserve his expected fortune. Greed, long nurtured, embore its fruit in blood. Approximately 200 words. Finally, Holmes lifted the broken silver locket chain from the table. The final connecting link. Final link. This heirloom, torn in struggle, was stolen from the safe, its clasp forced here in this room. The portrait inside, Lady Eleanor, was meant to suggest the curse, but the fresh metal stress, the oil fingerprints, the monogrammed cufflink dropped in haste during preparation in the attic, all bear Victor's mark. Every fragment, every stain. Every thread returns to one man. Victor surged forward against the constable's grip. Lies, circumstantial, nothing more. Holmes regarded him calmly. When you have eliminated the impossible, Mr. Voss, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. You staged the apparition, you strangled your uncle, you carried him to the river, every link accounted for. Lestrade rose. Victor Voss, I arrest you for the willful murder of Sir Reginald Voss. The handcuffs clicked shut again, and Victor's shoulders slumped. Defiance crumbled into silence. Lady Amelia wept quietly. Miss Clara stood taller, relief mingling with sorrow. Grimes bowed his head. The room fell still, save for the fire's soft crackle and the wind sighing at the windows. Holmes turned to me. The chain is complete, Watson. Forged in observation, tempered in logic, unbreakable by any artifice. I looked upon the scene with quiet awe. Holmes had laid each piece before us with surgical precision, and the listener who followed closely might have foreseen the final link in the locket chain. Did you? Before Holmes named it, what did the torn heirloom tell you? Every link accounted for. The chain complete. Chapter 8. Justice in chains. Dawn on the 8th day broke pale and cold over London, the sky a thin wash of grey above the waking city. At 221 B Baker Street the fire had burned low during the night. Now Mrs. Hudson stirred the coals to fresh life, and their crackle mingling with the distant clatter of milk carts and the first cries of newsboys. The sitting-room smelled of fresh coffee, lingering tobacco, and the clean scent of damp wool from coats left to dry. Holmes stood by the window, ulster already buttoned, revolver snug in his pocket. Lestrade has arranged the arrest at Limehouse Reach, he said quietly. Symbolic, perhaps. The very spot where the apparition was staged. We shall witness the binding of the criminal there. His voice carried the calm satisfaction of a case concluded. He drew once upon his pipe, the strong smoke curling upward, then set it aside. We took a hansom, through streets still quiet save for the rumble of early wagons. The cab's wheels hissed over damp cobblestones. Inside, the leather seats felt cold, carrying the faint odor of horse and old rain. Foghorns sounded faintly from the river, mournful in the morning stillness. That Big Ben tolled 6 as we crossed the city, its deep notes rolling over rooftops. At Limehouse Reach, the tide was low once more, exposing the black mud that smelled of silt, coal dust, rotting weed, and the sharp salt of the Thames. Lanterns burned on the wharf. Despite the growing light, their flames hissing softly. Inspector Lestrade waited with 4 constables near the warehouse, breath steaming in the chill. Victor Voss stood between 2 officers, wrists manacled, a coat collar turned up against the wind. His face was pale, eyes hollow, the defiance of the previous night replaced by a dull resignation. Lestrade touched his bowler hat. "Morning, Mr. Holmes. We've kept him here since last night. Thought the river might remind him of his handiwork." He nodded toward the mud. "The very spot. Poetic in a way." Holmes stepped forward. "Not poetic, Inspector. Precise. He chose this place to complete his deception. Now it completes his capture." Victor looked up as Holmes approached. The wind carried the scent of tar from the wharf and carbolic from the warehouse door. "You've won," Victor said hoarsely, "but it was meant to be clean. Suicide, curse fulfilled. No scandal, no trial." Holmes regarded him steadily. "Murder is never clean, Mr. Voss. You left traces, mud, threads, ash, a torn chain. The chain you forged now binds you." Victor's shoulders sagged. He glanced at the river, where gulls wheeled above the retreating water. I thought the veil would convince them. The locket. Everyone knew the story of Lady Eleanor. Father believed it himself. His voice cracked. I only wanted what was mine. Lestrade stepped closer. "Victor Voss, you are under arrest for the murder of Sir Reginald Voss. You will be taken to Bow Street, then to the Old Bailey. Anything you say may be given in evidence." The words were formal, almost ritual. One constable produced the charge sheet. And another adjusted the manacles with a metallic click that carried over the lapping water. Victor did not resist as they led him toward the waiting police van. At the last moment, he turned. "Tell Clara. I never meant for her to suffer. The fortune was for the family." His eyes met mine briefly, pleading, perhaps, or merely empty. Then he was helped inside, the door slamming shut with finality. The van rolled away, wheels grinding on the rough planks, fading into the morning mist. Lestrade exhaled a long breath. "That's one less ghost haunting the Thames, eh, Mr. Holmes?" Holmes nodded once. The apparition was always mortal. Now the mortal is bound. We walked along the wharf a short distance. The air was bitterly cold, cutting through coats. My boots left prints in the softening mud. Holmes paused where the body had lain days before. "Loose ends remain to be tied," he said. "The chloral in the brandy decanter, traced to a bottle in Victor's rooms. The cart tracks, measured and matched to the stable gig. The anonymous letters. Handwriting experts will confirm his pen. Even the grease paint Madame Zoltana mentioned. He purchased it for the glowing effect witnesses described." Lestrade grunted approval. "We've got men searching his lodgings now. Found a length of silk cord matching the strangulation marks, and a half-written letter confessing everything. Seems he meant to burn it, but hesitated." Holmes's eyes gleamed faintly. But hesitation betrays more surely than boldness. He knew the chain was closing. We returned to Grosvenor Square later that morning. Miss Clara met us in the drawing room, Lady Amelia beside her. The fire burned warm. The air smelled of roses and beeswax. Clara's face showed relief shadowed by grief. "It is over," she asked softly. Holmes inclined his head. "Victor is in custody. The evidence is overwhelming. Scotland Yard will present the case fully at the inquest. You and your mother are cleared of any suspicion." Lady Amelia spoke for the first time, voice low. "He was always restless, greedy, but I never thought—" She trailed off, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Grimes entered quietly with tea. The tray clinked softly. The hot liquid steamed, its fragrance cutting through the heavier scents of the room. I accepted a cup, gratefully. The warmth spreading through chilled fingers. Lestrade joined us shortly after, removing his bowler with a nod. "My thanks, Mr. Holmes. Without your chain of logic, we'd have buried this as suicide. The Commissioner sends his regards and a request for your bill of services." Holmes waved it aside. "Justice is payment enough, Inspector. Though I confess the data collected has been most instructive." We sat in companionable silence as the morning advanced. Outside, London stirred fully. Hansoms clattering, vendors calling, life resuming its rhythm. The criminal was bound, the apparition dispelled. I looked at Holmes, who sat with steepled fingers, calm and satisfied. The chain had held firm to the end, every loose thread drawn tight. You, dear reader, who followed each link. Did you feel the final snap when the manacles closed? The criminal bound. Justice served. Chapter 9. Links restored. The trial at the Old Bailey commenced on a brisk February morning in 1888, the courtroom heavy with the scent of polished oak, coal smoke from the stoves, and the faint mustiness of old legal tomes. Gas lamps burned steadily despite the daylight, filtering through high windows, casting long shadows across the benches. I sat in the public gallery, beside Miss Clara Voss, our breath visible in the chill air that seeped through every crack. Holmes occupied a seat further back, unobtrusive, yet watchful, his ulster folded neatly over his arm. The proceedings unfolded with Victorian precision. The Crown Prosecutor, a tall man with a resonant voice, presented the chain of evidence methodically. He began with the physical traces, the mismatched mud layers on Sir Reginald's boots, the stable cart tracks measured and photographed, the Turkish cigarette ash and monogrammed match case. Each piece was entered as exhibit, passed to the jury with deliberate care. Victor Voss sat in the dock, pale and composed, flanked by warders, his eyes rarely lifted from the floor. When the forensic details of the strangulation were described, the thin, silk cord fibers matching remnants in the attic trunk, the chloral residue in the brandy decanter. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Miss Clara gripped my hand briefly, her gloves smooth and cold. The judge, bewigged and stern, silenced the room with a single rap of his gavel. The motive was laid bare. Next, the original will of 1882 and the codicil of 3 weeks before the murder were read aloud. Family Bible entries detailing Victor's youthful thefts and mounting debts were produced, each annotation in Sir Reginald's hand bearing witness to long-simmering discord. The anonymous letters, drafts found in Victor's possession, were compared side by side with samples of his handwriting. Experts testified to the identical blue ink and pen pressure. The jury listened in grave silence. The defense attempted to cast doubt. Victor's counsel argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that many men smoked Turkish cigarettes, that the stable cart could have been borrowed by another. But when the torn locket chain was held aloft, its rose engraving matching the family crest, the fresh metal stress unmistakable, the courtroom grew still. Holmes's quiet testimony followed, measured, precise, devoid of a flourish. He recounted the forging of each link without once raising his voice. The jury needed no theatrics. The logic spoke for itself. After 3 days, the verdict came swiftly. Guilty of willful murder. The judge, in black cap, pronounced sentence: death by hanging. Yet Victor stood rigid as the words fell. A low sob escaped Miss Clara beside me. I pressed her hand in silent comfort. Outside the Old Bailey, the winter air bit sharply, carrying the smell of coal smoke and wet newspaper from vendors hawking the afternoon editions. Headlines already proclaimed: Thames, Apparition Unmasked, Nephew Hanged for Murder, Most Foul. In the weeks that followed, order began to return. At Grosvenor Square, the house slowly shed its shroud of mourning. Miss Clara assumed control of Voss Shipping with quiet determination. She retained the loyal staff, including Mr. Grimes, whose debts had been quietly settled from the estate funds as a gesture of trust restored. Lady Amelia withdrew to a small house in Kensington, content to live on her jointure and distant from the shadow of scandal. The business, once teetering under Victor's mismanagement, steadied under Clara's hand. New contracts were signed. Ships sailed again from the East India docks with full holds. One afternoon, in early March, I called upon Miss Clara at her invitation. The drawing room felt brighter, sunlight streaming through clean windows onto fresh flowers. The air smelled of beeswax polish, roses, and the faint sweetness of baking bread from the kitchens below. She greeted me warmly, no longer the pale, trembling figure of autumn. "Dr. Watson, I wish to thank you and Mr. Holmes in person," she said. "The nightmare is ended. Father's memory is cleared, the curse exposed as a cruel invention. I intend to honor him by steering the company forward with integrity." I bowed. "You have already begun. The future looks promising." She smiled faintly. "I have also decided to marry a young engineer from the firm. Honest, steady. He knew nothing of the dark months and cares only for the work ahead. We shall wed quietly in the spring." I offered my congratulations sincerely. As I left, the house felt alive once more. Servants moving with purpose, the clink of silver being polished, the soft murmur of ordinary life resuming. London, too, seemed to exhale. The fogs of winter thinned as spring approached. Hansom cabs rattled along streets now free of the weight of that particular mystery. Gas lamps flickered on at dusk with their familiar hiss. The Thames flowed on, its waters no longer haunted by false apparitions. Vendors called their wares, children played along the embankment. Their life continued in its steady, unremarkable rhythm. At Baker Street one evening, Holmes and I sat by the fire. The room smelled of strong tobacco, hot tea, and the clean warmth of coal. He plucked absently at the Stradivarius, producing a gentle, reflective air. I recorded the final notes of the case in my journal, the pen scratching softly on paper. "Order restored to London streets," Holmes said quietly, setting the violin aside. "The chain that bound the guilty has released the innocent." A satisfactory conclusion. I nodded, and a reminder that deception, however elaborate, cannot withstand observation. He smiled faintly. "Precisely, Watson. The links are restored. The city breathes freely once more." You, dear reader, who followed each step, did you see how the innocent parties, once shadowed by suspicion, now stepped into light? Miss Clara's future secured, the family name cleansed, the business saved. Holmes's method had not only caught the criminal, but mended what was broken. Order restored to London streets. By the fire at Baker Street. A quiet evening in late March found 221B Baker Street wrapped in the gentle hush that follows the close of a long case. The fire burned steadily in the grate, its warm glow pushing back the last chill of winter. The room smelled of strong tobacco from Holmes's pipe, fresh coffee on the side table, sweet brandy in our glasses, and the faint, comforting scent of coal smoke curling upward. Outside, the gas lamps had just been lit, their soft hiss mingled with the occasional clop of a late hansom and the distant toll of Big Ben marking the hour. I sat in my usual armchair, journal open on my knee, pen still warm from recording the final details. Holmes lounged opposite, legs stretched toward the hearth, violin resting across his lap. He plucked a slow, meditative phrase, something from Bach, and gentle and unhurried, then set the instrument aside. His eyes, usually sharp with the hunt, now held a rare, contented calm. "The newspapers have had their say," he remarked, nodding toward the stack on the table. "The Thames ghost unmasked. Nephew's greed ends family curse." Rather sensational, but accurate enough. He reached for his brandy, the glass cool against his palm. "Victor Voss hangs tomorrow at dawn. The chain is forged, the links tested, the criminal bound. A satisfactory close." I set my pen down. "Satisfactory indeed, yet I find myself reflecting more on the method than the man, your chain of deduction. It never fails to astonish." Holmes smiled faintly, drawing upon his pipe. The strong tobacco taste lingered on the air between us. "Then let us reflect, Watson. The chain method is simplicity itself, yet men overlook it because they prefer drama to observation. Begin with the smallest link, a speck of mud, a thread of lace, a flake of ash, and each is meaningless alone. But observe its properties, color, texture, composition, position, and the forge begins. Reason connects one to the next. Mud from Mayfair loam cannot lie atop Limehouse silt unless carried there by human hand. Machine lace cannot belong to an 18th century ghost. Turkish tobacco cannot appear where only Virginia was smoked. Link by link, the chain forms, add each connection, strengthening the last, until the whole binds the guilty so tightly that no escape remains." He leaned forward slightly, steepled fingers beneath his chin. "Consider the parallel with the speckled band. There, too, a chain was forged, a bell rope that was no rope, a ventilator that served no ventilation, a bed fixed immovable to the floor. Each observation meaningless until connected. Then the deadly truth emerged. A snake trained to descend at a signal, a summoned by a whistle in the night. The stepmother thought superstition would shield her crime. Observation pierced the veil. Or recall the red-headed league, absurd advertisements, orange hair, a tunnel dug beneath a pawnshop, seemingly disconnected links. Yet, when forged, they revealed a plot to rob a bank vault. In both cases, the criminal relied on misdirection, on the human tendency to accept the theatrical and ignore the mundane. Here, with the Thames apparition, the same principle held. A white veil, a ghostly call, a family legend. All theatre. But the earth clung to boots. Threads betrayed their origin. Ash recorded the smoker's presence. Observation defeats deception because the material world cannot lie. I nodded slowly. And yet, so many miss it, even I at first. "Precisely," Holmes continued, his voice low and thoughtful. "Most people see only the surface, the ghost, the curse, the tragedy. They feel the chill of the supernatural and stop there. But science of deduction demands we look beneath, measure, compare, test, connect, data, data, data. When the impossible is eliminated, the locked gate, the absent cab tracks, the false antique lace, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Victor Voss was improbable only until every link accounted for him. Then he became inevitable." He paused, gazing into the fire. The flames reflected in his eyes, steady and bright. This case was no different from others in principle. Yet it pleased me particularly. The river itself became our witness, silt and coal dust preserving footprints no man could erase. The past, family Bible, old wills, childhood resentments, reached forward to join the present. Observation bridged decades. Deception, however clever, leaves traces. Truth, patiently followed, finds them all. I sipped my brandy, its sweet warmth spreading through me. "You make it sound almost mechanical." "It is mechanical," Holmes replied, in the best sense. A machine of logic, powered by attention to detail. No emotion clouds it, no prejudice distorts it, only facts forged into chain. When the chain is complete, justice follows naturally, not as vengeance, but as consequence. We sat in companionable silence for a time. The fire crackled softly. Rain began to patter against the window panes, gentle after so many weeks of fog and storm. Holmes rose, crossed to the window, and looked down at Baker Street. Quiet now, lamps glowing like small suns in the dark. "The city sleeps," he said. "Tomorrow another puzzle may knock at our door, another chain to forge. But tonight, let the links rest." I closed my journal with a soft snap. "Until the next case, then." Holmes turned, a faint smile touching his lips. "Until the next chain forges, dear listener." The game continues. The fire burned on, warm and steady. London stretched beyond the window, vast and unquiet. Yet, for this moment, all was order, reason, and peace at 221B. Until the next chain forges, dear listener. The game continues.